I walked in the front door, and right there in the floor, staring up at me, it was barking his fool head off, just like the world was coming to an end. Bark, 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 bark was this little bunny rabbit. Welcome to Leading Leaders Podcast. 5-minute videos, 5 days a week. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. Yes, it might mess with your head to picture. Now, if you have a Chihuahua or a Mocha dog like we have, which is a Schnoodle, the idea of meeting you at the door and wagging his tail and jumping all over the place and maybe even barking with joy that you're home, well, that makes good sense. But if you have a pet rabbit, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. See, the word that I want to talk about today is called cognitive dissonance. And there are a couple of ways that cognitive dissonance comes into your life. A primary way, and by primary I mean a very gross way, I don't mean grotesque, I mean large scale, is when you see or hear something that everything you know about the world says, that ain't right. If somebody said to you, I was driving down the road the other day and this purple dinosaur jumped off of the roof of a building and landed on the front of my car. It bounced twice and drove away and left no damage. You might ask them how much they've been drinking, because what they've just said to you about their perception of reality makes no sense at all. Sometimes this happens in relationships. Maybe you're accused of doing something that you think to yourself, there's no way I would ever do that. That doesn't even make any sense. How could you even think that I said that or that I meant that? Maybe it's just your perception that's a little bit jacked up. But see, cognitive dissonance can also be intentionally used in communication as what's called a pattern interrupt. You just shock somebody by saying something that intentionally makes no sense and does not compute. It cannot be mentally processed in the string of things that you're saying. Let me give you an example. I use this a lot in the STORYPOWER masterclass because the illustration is so powerful about the speed of the conscious mind versus the non-conscious mind and how we try to reckon those two things together. If I were to say to you, 2 plus 2 is... you would probably respond 4 if you've done any kind of basic math in your life. And then 4 plus 4 is 8. Pretty quick, right? Why? Because you've memorized those things. They're in your non-conscious mind. And 8 plus 8 is 16, and 16 plus 16 is 32. And that's not complicated math. But if the next thing that I say to you is, and 32 plus green is what? Some people try to shove them together and go 13 green. I'm like, no, 13 green is actually an algebraic equation that would mean 13 times green, not plus green. It would still be 13 plus green. That's the only answer. 32 plus green is always 32 plus green. Not 13 times, not 32 times. It's not a multiplication. It's an addition problem, and it can't be solved without other work. But the idea that your brain is already on the path. 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 plus 8 is 16. 16 plus 16 is 32. 32 plus green is, wait a minute, does not compute. Cognitive dissonance. See, there's a reason for using that sometimes in the way that you communicate, because you're trying to lead someone down a path and then intentionally bring them to an abrupt stop so that you can change directions, so that you can cause them to genuinely, cognitively think about the words that you just said or you're about to say. There's a good reason to use it. Now, cognitive dissonance, the studies that were done in the 1950s and the things that have been said about them in the ways of rhetoric and political persuasion and communication, especially in the media, those are totally different. See, cognitive dissonance also causes you to look at a decision you've already made. In the sales cycle, for an example, it's been said in sales for years and years and years, and anybody who's ever been trained in sales knows this, and anybody who's actually ever been sold something knows this. We tend to buy emotionally and rationalize later. It's where the phrase buyer's remorse comes from. We buy because in the moment it seems like the right thing. I love that car. I love that color. I love this new car smell and the smell of the leather. And I love the fact that when I just took it on the test drive, it was almost like everybody on the street turned to look at me and look at my new car. It was so special feeling. I just have to have this car, and then I get home and go through the budget and I look at, now that I've added on all these options and I've seen what the payment's going to be, I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? And I feel guilty because, I could have done something else with that money, or I could have helped other people with that money, or I could have just saved a little bit of that money. And And now I feel bad that I made a decision in the moment that felt really good then, and now it doesn't feel so good, and that also is cognitive dissonance. But see, now you have to rectify that cognitive dissonance, and somewhere along the way, you're either going to have to ultimately decide, I'm glad I bought the car. I love the car. And I'm gonna accept the guilt and the remorse until it goes away, and I'm gonna keep the car. I'm just gonna deal with my feelings because I love the car. Or you're gonna say, you know what, I've got 24 hours, I'm taking it back. I can't deal with this, I can't cope with this, I have to admit I was wrong, I made a compulsive, emotional decision. Now that I have the car, but I'm taking the car back, so I'm taking it back, I'm done, I'm out. Now, either one of those is a conflicting problem, and either one of those becomes an emotional challenge for you individually to deal with. Now, what brings this up and why in the world am I talking about it today? Well, because story power is what I teach people, and story power is about reading and writing the things going on in your head. It's the stories that you tell others about what you believe and who you are and what you've done in life and the tragedies that you've overcome and the victories that you've found. But sometimes in those stories, you reveal things about yourself that you didn't know that you'd been lying to yourself about. You didn't realize that when you bought that car 12 years ago, you hated yourself for several months or even years, or maybe even now you're still feeling conflicted about having bought that car. The story kind of brings that stuff out. Maybe it's not the car, maybe it's the marriage. I talked to a lady not too long ago who said, yeah, we got divorced after 27 years, and I thought to myself, well, this September is 26 years for me. How do you get 27 years and then call it quits? I mean, what went wrong after 27 years? I would have thought you'd have it figured out by now. I'm hoping I've got it figured out by now. She said, oh no, it didn't take 27 years to have a bad marriage. It took about 5. We just wouldn't bury the dead horse for 22 years. That might be cognitive dissonance. In fact, I think it fits the definition. But see, we play the same game in the media. We play the same game in politics. In fact, I shared an article just before I posted the description of this Leading Leaders podcast on my Facebook page. And if you're paying any attention to this video whatsoever, I challenge you to go read every word of the article. It's from The Atlantic. And in the article, he does a great job, or the writers do a great job of explaining what is cognitive dissonance and how it applies. But in the writing of the article, they also use a very powerful form of manipulative persuasion to convince you of a certain political benefit. Not necessarily for you, but for the purpose of the writers of the article. They use a whole lot of scientific, technical, communicative jargon to bury an idea in their long conversation that will cause you to question what you already believe. Now, on the one hand, some people are going to read it, and they're going to read across those 2 or 3 paragraphs and go, yeah, well, I totally agree with that. They're so absolutely right. I'm glad someone's finally calling them out on it. How stupid have people been to believe that all this time? And then other people are going to read the same 2 paragraphs and go, oh, well, they hate so-and-so, and that's the only reason they wrote the whole article. And I would love to know your feedback on that, because story power is a powerful way both to expose what you're deeply feeling so that you can work through that with a coach, and to bring to someone else's mind the cognitive dissonance they're living in. Oh, sure, it's great for telling about your tragedies and your triumphs, for exposing your overcoming and your victories. Story power is great for that. It's a great leadership tool for that. But understanding how it works in the mind and what it reveals about you and what it reveals about others, but that's what makes it a powerful leadership tool. And I would really encourage you to go back and read the article from The Atlantic that I shared on my timeline and ask yourself, do you see the cognitive dissonance, not only in your own life, but in that article and the way they're using it to try to influence your decision making? If you do, but you're not sure how to use that to your own advantage, give me a call. Let's talk about how story power can change your leadership role in your life and communication. And if you do get it and you're a little frustrated by it, then share it the same way I did and help other people become aware of how the media uses tools like cognitive dissonance to manipulate your political persuasion. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.